Your weapon, officer. Good firing, Wei.
Pendrew! What are you doing?
I told you he wasn't important. Now he is. He's going to help us nail Charlie Pang. It's for the greater good, Wei. You understand?
I don't think I do, sir.
Wei, I know who you are. You're just like me. You do what must be done. Local PD is on their way. You should go.
If it wasn't for the assistance of Thomas Pendrew, I highly doubt Wei Shen would have ever been allowed to return or more accurately get hired by the Hong Kong Police Department. When you dive into Wei's psychological evaluation, his familial ties to Hong Kong and the Sun On Yee, if it was all up to Raymond Mok, his transfer would have immediately been denied. Wei's too emotional, too easily invested, too easy to compromise, and from Raymond's own assessments has abused his position of power as a police officer time and again to settle his own personal vendettas. But see, for Thomas Pendrew, the superintendent to the Hong Kong Police Department, it was that precise reason Wei was the perfect recruit to bring into HKPD. All previous attempts to infiltrate the Sun On Yee have failed, and as we'll see from Pendrew's own code of conduct, it's highly likely through Wei he believed he had found just another person exactly like him. Someone who was willing to bend the rules of the law, turn a blind eye in order to make ends meet, and do whatever he felt was necessary to reach that next level. It was self-serving. The difference here, though, is where Pendrew focused on furthering his career and building an impressive arrest record. He believed for Wei, it was a matter of revenge, leveraging all the anger, pain, and sorrow he had been harboring since he was a child. Thinking the position that he had granted Wei was just as much of a chance to get even with the people who had destroyed his family as it was liberating to do without any repercussions or need to worry about the badge he represented. After many years of bending the law in order to further increase the success of his own career, it would turn out his initial hopeful understanding of Wei Shen was a giant mistake that would lead to his own arrest and death inside of police custody.
It's for the greater good, Wei. You understand?
I don't think I do, sir.
Wei, I know who you are. You're just like me. You do what must be done. Local PD is on their way. You should go.
The exact date when Pendrew joined the police force is unknown. As of what we are given on him in his earliest time before the events of Sleeping Dogs in 2012, we know he joined the Hong Kong Police Department a few years before the Sino-British Joint Declaration, thus spending some time in a special branch of the Anti-Triad Task Force. Now, by all accounts, his career and overall performance during this time period appeared to be quite unremarkable, with nothing noteworthy sticking out. There were no real accolades or achievements to speak of, and it doesn't really appear as if he was someone who caught the eye of his superiors. Rather, he was someone who came in, got to work, did his job, and ultimately just left. But that all changed in 1981. Completely catching everyone off guard, Pendrew led a police operation that resulted in the deaths of several Red Poles within the Sun On Yee. These Red Poles were Big Fish Chu, Wilson No Cash Wang, and Fat Sammy Zhang. These were far from no names, as these were serious players who had real potential of becoming the next heads of the Sun On Yee. Each one of them had the possibility of even ascending to the position of chairman. With all three gone, the Sun On Yee was thus dealt a serious blow to their leadership and overall operations within their criminal organization. Meanwhile, Pendrew was celebrated for his first significant breakthrough, up until that point in his surprisingly unimpressive career. Following the deaths of Big Fish Chu, Wilson No Cash Wang, and Fat Sammy Zhang, Pendrew would later strike another massive blow to the Sun On Yee by arresting the Three Tigers. The Three Tigers were the most powerful leaders of the Sun On Yee since the British colonial era. So in a relatively short period of time, a no-name officer somehow managed to wipe out 6 significant leaders within the Sun On Yee. Following the successful takedown of the Three Tigers, he was officially recognized for his work against one of, if not the biggest triad in Hong Kong, granting him a massive career advancement from Interpol to the position of superintendent. In addition to that, Pendrew would also be awarded Hong Kong's Medal of Merit. Publicly, it was nothing less than a meteoric rise that earned him quite a lot of praise, but of course, it was all manufactured. None of the success Pendrew was achieving would have been possible had it not been for the cooperation of David Wai Lin. David was a Sun On Yee member who, for many years, slowly and deliberately cultivated his own image within the Triad, crafting a version of himself that appeared to be a peaceful mediator when in reality he was an angry, cold-blooded, and vengeful individual. It was that exact personality trait combined with his desire to keep up appearances that led him to establish a sort of working partnership with Pendrew, who sounds to have been the one to make first contact between the two of them. Upon their contact, David had already reached the position of Red Pole and was facing against the likes of Big Fish Chu, Wilson No Cash Wang, and Fat Sammy Shan. And so, David provided information on them to Pendrew in 1981, hoping to wipe out his competition and leave the path to chairman open for him alone. Seeing how successful that was, he would later repeat his cooperation by providing valuable information against the three Tigers to Pendrew, securing their arrest and removing the final obstacles standing between him and being the sole power figure within the Sun On Yee. Of course, if you haven't figured it out by now, David is none other than Uncle Po, who was catapulted to the top practically overnight. Now, the cooperation between the two of them may not have been inherently bad by itself, but rather it's the nature, the partnership, and really the secrecy behind it. Because of Pendrew's relatively unknown and unremarkable status prior to these unfathomable blows to the Sun On Yee, he was placed under investigation by others within the Hong Kong Police Department without his knowledge. That investigation did lead to him being busted by security cameras catching him speaking to David Wei Shen, confirming the suspicion of those who already doubted his integrity and true intentions. According to the security camera footage, Pendrew and David were caught on 4 separate occasions in the 6 months leading to the murders and arrests of the 6 leading Triad members. When confronted with these discoveries, Pendrew simply stated these 4 meetings with David Wei Shen were not of the conspiratorial nature, but rather a part of a long-term effort to cultivate Triad sources. Regardless, the police kept files on him with updated information dated from December 1st, 1992, all the way to June 1st, 2002. Within the initial files, in December of 1992, the conclusion was Superintendent Pendrew's private finances and living style did not provide any evidence of any excess capital or any financial assets beyond what would be normal for a man of his pay grade. Since his record and other dealings besides being caught on camera with David didn't support him acting illegally or conspiring for any monetary gains, they concluded there was no further investigation on him necessary. As of right now, they had no concrete evidence of any wrongdoing. However, the following reports within his file all seem to circle around what was effectively the deal he and David made when starting to work together. Following the rise of Uncle Po, the agreement he and Pendrew had was essentially Uncle Po would continue to provide scapegoats and steadily feed information on his enemies to help keep Pendrew away from being seen as suspicious. To go a step further in aiding his public image and belief under his leadership, crime overall has fallen, Po agreed to consolidate the overall power and leadership within the Sun On Yee that was now under him and heavily restrict any acts of public violence. In exchange, he would be given unofficial police immunity by Pendrew. This agreement was apparently leaked privately on separate occasions to the Hong Kong Police Department, with a file updated on October 7, 1994, stating a criminal informant, codenamed Octopus, shared there were rumors the Sun On Yee leadership had direct access to senior Hong Kong police personnel. Unfortunately, there was no additional information provided beyond that, and it was believed the reason no names were given or any other information provided was because of fear. 8 years later, dated February 22, 2002, another criminal informant, codenamed Falling Water, would step forward reporting attending a Sun On Yee planned meeting, where senior leadership asserted that provided the Triads kept its operation within certain unspecified parameters, kept violence out of public eye, and provided occasional lower echelons arrests, there was no reason to fear a large police investigation or related prosecutions. Again, revealing that the Sun On Yee and the police to a certain degree, or at least high-ranking police officers, were in fact working together. Unfortunately, what could be done with this information was severely undermined due to Falling Water refusing to provide names and not knowing why the Sun On Yee leadership was so confident about not seeing a large police presence against them. Sadly, this would result in Falling Water being killed, as the last file on Pendrew was dated June 1st, 2002, only 4 months after leaking to the police. The Sun On Yee had a high-ranked police officer working with them. He was believed at that point to have been murdered due to contact essentially being lost over the last month or so. No body was ever officially discovered, but more unnamed and redacted sources were insisted that the criminal informant was essentially betrayed by senior police officers with vested interests in officially closing Hong Kong Police Department's internal investigation into learning who the triads actually had access to. With Falling Water now gone, which most likely was the most valuable informant the police had, and possibly the highest ranking one within the Sun On Yee, considering he was able to at least attend a planned meeting with Sun On Yee leadership, the attempts by law enforcement to crack down on the triads would end up stalling, which from Pendrew's perspective was absolutely fine. Not only did it mean he wouldn't have to worry about anyone potentially discovering the shady origins of his suspicious rise to the top, but the position he held would continue to be justified, proven to be the right move on account of Uncle Po holding up his end of the deal. And it seems that was how everything remained until the late 2000s. During this period, the Sun On Yee continued to grow, and it was with this expansion that came a new generation of triad members who simply did not have the same level of subtlety and overall care about respecting the main rule of not engaging in public violence. One of the two smaller gangs within the Sun On Yee that were quickly rising on the police's radar was the Water Street Gang, who engaged in acts of extortion, stealing valuable goods, committing murders, and were believed to be responsible for putting up contracts to commit hits, primarily on the rival 18K triads, but also on the Jade Gang. Although in the earlier period of tension between the Jade and Water Street Gang, it was less a matter of open fighting and more of both gangs becoming aggressive within their territory. But as time went on, the hurt feelings between the leader of Water Street, Winston Chu, and the head of Jade Gang, Dog Eyes, intensified, eventually leading to what would be just shy of a full-blown civil war within the Sun On Yee, brought on by Dog Eyes' aggressive expansion into Winston's territory. Now, most of that aggressive expansion is seen within Sleeping Dogs' main story, but it all started a few years prior. This added the added effect of Pendrew beginning to see Uncle Po as weak and incapable of keeping the Sun On Yee in check like he once was, or alternatively of seeing Uncle Po actually testing the limits of what he could get away with, given the incriminating evidence he held over Pendrew. Whatever the case, the change in direction from the smaller factions would compel Pendrew to begin looking into taking down the man who practically gave him his entire career.
It seems that the evidence against you has failed to appear. How do you explain that? You must be a very dangerous man, Wei Shen. That is exactly what we want people to think. I trust that my men weren't too rough on you.
Now that Pendrew was in the mind state to cut off his criminal connections once and for all, he began to launch police operations and legitimately infiltrating the Sun On Yee now, the purpose of which was so he could legally acquire modern evidence of illegal activity and silence all who knew of his deals with Uncle Po. This brings us to Officer Charles Ho. Officer Ho, after his own number of psychological evaluations and tests clearing him for undercover work, was given a police handler who was none other than Raymond Mock, and with Mock's help, Ho was able to be introduced to Water Street through a criminal informant in January of 2010. According to the reports on his progress, Ho at the time did well at proving himself, even elevating to the higher tiers within the Water Street Gang. At one point, he even had direct access to what the police referred to as the Red Pole Winston Chu. While it was correct that he did have direct access to Winston Chu, the police were horribly wrong by referring to Winston as a Red Pole. And so the police had this level of confidence and hope in an operation that ultimately would lead nowhere, as Officer Ho not only reported Winston Chu was not a real Red Pole, but the gang itself was so low within the Sun On Yee, his attempts to gather information on them or major leadership within the organization ultimately went nowhere. They were too localized and essentially isolated. No one knew anything, no one could provide any contact details or anything of use. All Ho was basically doing was slowly losing his own trust within the Water Street Gang, more and more. His later reports claimed he was being slowly cut out from private conversations with Winston and his right-hand man, Conroy Wu, until eventually, after receiving an anonymous tip, Officer Ho's body was discovered buried in a wooden coffin in 6 feet of sand. Despite numerous signs of extensive torture, his official cause of death was by asphyxiation. Later, during Wei Shen's own infiltration into the Water Street Gang, Conroy would reveal the way he was able to sniff out Ho as a police officer was through his refusal to kill. He respected the badge and the law it represented. Considering Pendrew and Raymond's private meetings with Wei Shen during his infiltration into the Sun On Yee, it's not too far-fetched to state there were similar meetings between Officer Ho, Pendrew, and Raymond, with Ho most likely revealing they try as much as they can to test him. Now, given how Raymond and Pendrew both act with Wei, I would surmise in the light of these tests and growing stress of the work, Raymond most likely encouraged taking a break, while Pendrew could have easily encouraged bending the rules to see what is necessary done. It would have been the exact same thing he pulls on Wei when he gets a hold of a prominent leader within the Jade Gang, Charlie Peng's gun. As we've seen with that scenario, Pendrew not only overrides Raymond by opting to privately meet with Wei in light of securing Peng's gun, but even takes it a step further, seizing the opportunity to shoot dead Triad members in an effort to frame Charlie as responsible for those killings. Whatever the exact nature of the communication was between Pendrew, Ho, and Raymond is ultimately up for debate. But with his death, the latest attempt by law enforcement to break into the Sun On Yee and once and for all find evidence to confirm all of Pendrew's fears of being discovered came to an end. And this would lead HKPD to expand its operations and look for officers who were both willing and capable of passing themselves off as legitimate Triad members. Specifically, officers who could successfully sell themselves as down on their luck street kids willing to do whatever it took to rise to the top of the Sun On Yee. As luck would have it, around the same time, Wei Shen was looking for a possible transfer from the San Francisco Police Department back in the United States. Excluding Raymond's initial assessment and recommendation to deny Wei, you should be able to see why he was such a tempting candidate here. Following Charles Ho's death, it became harder to infiltrate the Sun On Yee due to their heightened suspicion after discovering a cop had been among them. Wei, on the other hand, had already proven, per his controversial police record throughout his time on the San Francisco Police Department, that he was willing to abuse his position as a law enforcement officer. And not too different from Pendrew's own private conduct, people connected to the declining health and eventual death of his sister Mimi Shen were themselves killed under suspicious circumstances, pointing to Wei as the one responsible for their deaths. I do want to make this clear though, despite it popping up in his record and being investigated for it, he was never convicted of any wrongdoing either. Just all hearsay and rumors of him being responsible that would just make working with him in general become a highly controversial move. In addition to his conduct, there is also the fact that Wei had childhood ties to people who were prominent Sun On Yee members. Jackie Ma was a close childhood friend of his who had frequently been seen communicating and working closely with Winston Chu and the Water Street Gang. Winston also grew up in the same area as Jackie and Wei, as did Dog Eyes, who had dated Wei's sister before Wei's mom moved him and Mimi to the United States as a way to protect her children from the dangerous lifestyle that was taking a toll on Mimi's life every single day. While Pendrew immediately set his sights on allowing Wei to return to Hong Kong and join as an undercover police officer, I want to point something out sneaky that's easy to miss. According to the police informant Falling Water, the Triads had direct access to high-ranking police officers, meaning the department was indeed aware they were compromised but were never told who or how many officers were on the payroll of the Triads. So when Wei is initially arrested by the police to help sell the idea that he was just another person returning to Hong Kong and caught up in a police sting, it's perfect for the outsiders looking in. But when he's brought into the interrogation room with Pendrew and Raymond, the moments where Raymond deactivates the security cameras is interesting because while he thinks he's further securing the secrecy of the operation, the biggest aid the Triads had ever had was the man who essentially controlled both sides of the table. That's not even to mention Officer Tang's later shock when Wei, an officer who worked directly under Pendrew, was willing to offer his help in her investigations. This revealed that Pendrew has always kept a tight leash on those reporting directly to him, and didn't like the idea of Officer Tang, who he despised, getting too close with those under his command. Officer Tang appeared to be a good, honest cop who had a soft spot for the more unfortunate, lower-level street thugs, even attempting to offer them deals as she would with Wei before discovering he was an officer, and later with Jackie. A dangerous move for someone like Pendrew, who couldn't risk the slightest revelation about his dealings. Of course, Wei's willingness to not only work with Officer Tang, but actively offer his help in any investigations she had, would only turn out to be another part of Wei that Pendrew had left unaccounted for. Pendrew had essentially taken Wei as someone who was, as he put it, just like him, mistaking Wei's personal emotional connection to seeing proper justice done for something closer to his own motivations. In reality, it would turn out to be a full-blown difference in objectives between the two of them.
I'm moving on to greener pastures, but not without taking care of some unfinished business with you and Sonny first.
We had a deal, did we not, Pendrew? I gave you the 3 tigers. It made your career.
And I let you and Sonny continue operating.
A sacrifice you were willing to make.
At the time. I'm putting Sonny away, and with you gone, I'll finish this once and for all.
The only difference between you and me is I know what I am.
I wanted to take this time to point out how Pendrew attempts to calm all of Wei's protests by reassuring him he was doing a good job. That he was just like Pendrew, doing what was necessary. Because I've already shown it in its entirety, the initial scene involving Charlie Pang's gun and Wei's shock at Pendrew shooting dead triads, I'm not going to go over it in great detail, but rather follow that up with what happened after the death of Uncle Po, who apparently succumbed to the wounds he suffered during Winston's wedding while in the hospital. With Uncle Po gone, the aim of taking him down evolved over to gathering enough evidence on Sonny Wo and putting him behind bars. Initially, this request for Wei to move over to Sonny and focus on him was a very curious order to say the least, because Sonny was not a Sun On Yee member. He was an affiliate, who at the time of Wei's investigation was working extremely closely with the Sun On Yee Red Pole Big Smile Lee. Big Smile Lee was considered the strongest and most aggressive out of all the Red Poles and was pretty much responsible for pushing Dog Eyes' aggression into Winston's territory. He even went as far as personally muscling in on Winston's territory directly after he was killed, which resulted in a giant firefight that bled out into the streets. Sonny, along with Big Smile Lee, were essentially running a sex trafficking ring, and according to what Wei saw, it was Big Smile Lee that was the biggest threat and the worst one out of all the triads that needed to be taken out, which was especially true following the death of Uncle Po. A temporary chairman was only put in place while Po was recovering in the hospital, which, through some quick thinking, the Red Pole Broken Nose Jiang was able to override Big Smile Lee as the temporary chairman by suggesting Po's nephew, Tu Chen Sao, take over in the meantime. Since Tu Chen Sao had a gambling problem and a horrible heroin addiction, along with no real desire to run the Sun On Yee, it would only be a matter of time until Big Smile Lee got tired of respecting traditions and forcing his way to the position of chairman, something that became even more likely with Po's sudden death. However, Pendrew would focus on Sonny instead. The reason for this decision wasn't because of his major connections to the music industry, drugs, porn, and trafficking women overall, but rather because he was part of Pendrew and Uncle Po's original deal, where Po had agreed to help keep the fighting off the streets and provide occasional lower-level arrests. The police immunity Pendrew granted him was extended to Sonny Wo as well, and that meant that if Pendrew moved against one of them, there was a real fear the other would leak their original deal. So he had to take care of both. Towards the end of Sleeping Dogs' story, when Uncle Po is killed, Wei hands over surveillance footage of Vivian Liu, a famous singer and actress in Hong Kong, and a client of Sonny's Three Circles Entertainment. Because of this surveillance footage, Pendrew would essentially call off the entire investigation, celebrating it as a giant victory and telling Wei that he did his job. And that's because Pendrew ultimately got what he wanted. That footage took care of the final thorn in his side. It proved Sonny was blackmailing women and using them as prostitutes. And specifically, Pendrew was leveraging that footage to then blackmail Vivian to pressure her into testifying against Sonny, guaranteeing his arrest. And if she refused, well, he would just leak the videos and destroy her entire reputation in the process. This sudden declaration of a job well done would be where Wei would technically go rogue, telling Pendrew,
"Those are my orders."
Fuck your orders and fuck you too, Pendrew. I came on to take down the Sun On Yee, not to shuffle the deck.
Because as far as he was concerned, he came to take down the Sun On Yee, which with Sonny and Po gone would be in an arguably weaker state, but given Big Smile Lee's more aggressive nature and high ambitions, and no one else to answer to or provide any opposition would thus mean the next era, the Sun On Yee under Big Smile Lee, would end up being the worst Hong Kong had ever seen yet. The following moment of showing up at Uncle Po's funeral to arrest Sonny in front of everyone is nothing more than a disrespectful symbolic beginning of a new era, where Pendrew would wipe out his two ties to where and how he got his career started, while leaving the 18K Triads, the Sun On Yee's biggest rival, to wipe out the one and final loose end, that being Wei Shen. It's quite funny to think that Pendrew's pattern and basically how he controlled this entire undercover operation would, theoretically in the end, give him the ability to just dismiss Wei, write him off as a rogue cop who became too emotional and lost who he was and what he was ordered to do, or using his own words against him here.
Whatever I did, I made Hong Kong a better place. I served the greater good. But you let them get to you. You abandoned your duty, officer, and became one of them.
This whole speech he had prepared for Wei, explaining how he did everything for the betterment of Hong Kong, claiming he served the greater good, just shows that in the end, Uncle Po was right. He at least knew what he was. Unlike Pendrew, who jumped through these mental hoops to justify his illegal and immoral actions, he was willing to cut the investigation of the Sun On Yee off prematurely, after directing Wei towards someone who was not only able to operate the type of business ventures he did thanks to his protection and connections with the Big Smile Lee, but to additionally top that off, would continue to let Wei get in harm's way with the 18K, and then let him be tortured and potentially killed by Lee's men after he revealed to them that Wei Shen was in fact a police officer, full-on sacrificing the one person who was able to achieve the very thing he'd hoped would have been given to him. And in the end, Wei was nothing but another disposable asset, and Pendrew kept thinking he'd get away with it, and most likely would have, had it not been for Wei ultimately securing video evidence of Pendrew killing Uncle Po in the hospital. That evidence sent him off to prison with the very people he had put away, letting them know Po wasn't only finished off by him, but that his shady dealings were most likely how they ended up there in prison with him in the first place. And really, I love Pendrew's story of corruption because from the beginning to the end, it's not plainly a case of Pendrew believing he was doing questionable things for the greater good, making us question the means to the ends, but rather controlling the narrative from the very beginning and everyone involved right up until the very end. He was never serving the law. He was fully abusing it for his own personal gains, placing his goals and desires before the people he swore to protect and the lives of the officers he promised to look after. When he's busted, there's then no remorse or acknowledgement of any wrongdoing, just simply, you can't do this to me, you're sending me off to die. Quite a 180 for someone who didn't think twice about those whose death warrants he signed, and doing so all under the thin veil of it being justice.